From San Antonio, Texas, home of the Alamo, the Riverwalk, and the World Heritage San Antonio Missions, this is the Exit Planning Coach podcast with John F. Dini. Designed to help advisors who work with business owners, John talks with top professionals in the exit planning field about best practices, marketing tips, and how to be more effective when working with owners. Now, here's John F. Dini.
Welcome to today's edition of the Exit Planning Coach podcast. I'm here with Kelly Finnell, one of the foremost ESOP consultants in the United States and somebody who's been doing it since the very beginning. Kelly did his first white paper on ESOPs in 1979, only 5 years after the law was passed that created the entities in the first place. Kelly, we talked last time about your background in ESOPs, but we talked about the tax advantages, we talked about the type of the ideal owner, we talked about the profile of a company that does ESOPs. Can you walk me through what an ESOP transaction looks like? How does this happen? What are the nuts and bolts of it?
Well, the first thing that typically happens is we receive a referral from an advisor. We don't market directly to business owners. We market to advisors who bring us in to meet one of their clients. And so we might have a couple of video conferences with the advisor and the clients and help answer their questions, help them understand better what an ESOP is. And if they decide that it might be a potentially good strategy for them, they hire us to do a feasibility study. And in that feasibility study, we address the four key questions that every business owner has. If I sell to an ESOP, how much would I expect the purchase price to be? So that's a valuation, an ESOP specific valuation question. The next question is, how's the transaction going to be financed? And to give you a preview, about 40% of the transaction will be financed with bank debt. So to keep it simple, assume a $10 million sale to an ESOP. You might expect about $4 million of bank debt, and then the rest will be financed with seller debt, an IOU between the company and the selling shareholder, promising to pay interest while the bank loan is outstanding. And then after the bank loan has been fully repaid, pay principal and interest.
So this is subordinated debt.
It's subordinated to the bank loan, and as a result is entitled to a subordinated debt type of return, which in today's market for an ESOP transaction is about 12%.
Wow.
So initially, business owners react negatively when they hear about seller debt. But when they think about it, what would happen in our example if they had gotten the full $10 million? Would they have invested $6 million of that at a 12% return? I don't think so. I think they're going to invest their money pretty conservatively because this is their life's work. This is their nest egg. And so most people are going to invest it at 4 or 5%. Well, if you can earn twice that amount in an investment that you think is very safe and secure, that is your company, then that's a pretty attractive return. And so about half of that return is going to come in the form of current pay interest, which is going to be taxed at ordinary income tax rates. And then the rest of that, the other half, is going to come in the form of warrants. And those warrants are going to be taxed at long-term capital gains tax rates. So the return on those seller notes is very attractive. And most owners, instead of being negative about the thought of seller notes, actually embrace that. The other two things that we address in the feasibility analysis are corporate governance. How's the business going to operate, and how are decisions going to be made after the ESOP transaction?
Oh, I can't tell you how many times we've brought up ESOP and heard the owner say, I'm not going to have all my employees voting on what I do.
Nobody would ever do an ESOP if that were the case. So the preview of that is that under corporate governance for any company, the shareholders elect the board, and the board appoints, monitors, hires and fires the executives. So that's basic business law. The only thing that's changed when you do an ESOP is that you only have one shareholder, and that shareholder is the ESOP trustee. And so if you have the ESOP trustee voting the shares, and if that ESOP trustee is working under a directed trustee engagement agreement, which they would with an ESOP, then the current board, the pre-transaction board, is going to hire and fire the trustee and is going to make recommendations each year to the trustee, the company shareholder, as to how the trustee should vote for directors for the next year. And so as a result of that circular kind of motion, there's really no change in the leadership of the company or in how decisions are made before or after the transaction.
So they go out and they get the financing. Yeah, the 12% is interesting because what it brought to mind was how many owners I've talked to over the years that say, I don't invest in the market, I only invest in my own company. Well, now you're really investing in your own company, right?
Exactly right.
For a better return than the market's giving you. You talk about the expense of the lawyers. How many attorneys besides you? Obviously, we have to have you. You're the number one lawyer, but who do you represent, or do you represent as an attorney?
We don't work as attorneys. Me and my partner both have law degrees. We're both members of the Tennessee Bar, but we work as consultants, and we represent the company when we're doing the feasibility study. And then if the company moves to implementation, we represent the selling shareholders. Okay. We're going to have company counsel involved in this. Most of the time, company counsel does not have ESOP expertise. So we're probably going to bring in special ESOP counsel on the company side. Then we're going to have a trustee who's going to be the purchaser of the stock. And the trustee is going to have its own attorney and a valuation advisor. And then the bank that loans the money is going to have its attorney as well.
It's a good thing we justified the fees ahead of time, because right now everybody would be groaning, at that list.
And a lot of times, most of the people that are involved in ESOP transactions are going to work on a flat fee. So the client's not going to get nickeled and dimed and charged $800 for a 30-minute phone call.
That's true. A number of the attorneys that worked on the deal we worked on together were all quoted a flat fee.
Yep.
You said we function as ESOP consultants, and we had you and I had a conversation a couple months ago about an ESOP investment banker, and what's the difference?
Well, one of the differences is the fee structure. Investment bankers in a traditional M&A transaction charge a fee based on the value of the stock that they sell. And that might be, on average 4%. ESOP consultants don't work like that. We charge a flat fee based on the estimated amount of time we're going to have involved in the transaction. And so that's based on the size of the company and the complexity of the transaction. So we're going to work in a way that's much more similar to the way the company's lawyer and CPA work on a time-based flat fee. And so what we typically find is that our fee is about 1/3 to 1/4 of what an investment banker's fee would be to actually do more work. We stay involved with the company after the transaction. As soon as the transaction closes and the investment bankers disappear, we stay involved. We help the company design and implement an employee communication rollout meeting. And we'll redo that delivery every year for the company so that their employees can understand what the ESOP is, how it benefits them, so that the owner can maximize the bang for all of the money that it's spent in this. Employees are only going to be positively motivated by the ESOP if they understand it.
Sure.
And that understanding requires a process of constant
Right.
communication.
Yeah, we'll come back in a second. And I want to talk about the understanding because there's a lot of misunderstanding on the employee side about ESOPs as well. But give us a minute to pay for the podcast, and then we'll come back and we'll finish this up. This has been really terrific, Kelly. I appreciate it. Hello, John F. Dini here, and I'm very excited to announce the publication of the Exit Planning Coach Handbook. Inspiration for the handbook comes from my 25 years of working as a coach to business owners, with 12 of those years dedicated to helping them plan their business transitions. It is a guide for advisors that explains why working with business owners is so dramatically different from working with other executives. It provides insights on how to approach planning conversations with owners more effectively. Plus, it takes you through the steps that will help you develop your relationship as their most trusted advisor. I wrote this book for advisors who want their clients to move on to a second act that's even more rewarding than their first. If you read any of my previous books, you know I don't lecture. It's a conversation between two professionals. If you work with business owners, I strongly encourage you to read the Exit Planning Coach Handbook. I think it will quickly become a go-to in your reference library. It is currently available on Amazon and the Kindle store in paperback and as an audiobook. Welcome back to the Exit Planning Coach podcast. I'm here today with Kelly Finnell, one of the foremost ESOP consultants in the country. And because we are an advisor to advisor podcast, Kelly has been talking more about the nuts and bolts of the kind of companies, the kind of owners, and the process of implementing an ESOP rather than just, your basic ESOP 101. It's been really educational. Kelly, again, if somebody is riding in their car and has their cell phone in hand and is desperate to call you right away, how would they get a hold of you?
The phone is 901-259-7979.
And it's Executive Financial Services, and you are
Yes.
in Memphis, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
I'm in Memphis currently, but we're in the middle of the year, and I already have 62 Marriott nights. So I'm in Memphis. That's where I call home, but I'm on the road a lot.
It's a relative term, I know. When I first moved to San Antonio and then wound up getting bought out of a joint venture and commuting for 2 years to Manhattan for 5 days a week. Everybody has consulting jokes, right? How you treat rent-a-cars and all the things about a consultant. I have my own personal consulting joke. That's true. You've been doing this too long when the Continental Gate agent invites you to his retirement party.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, you traveled a lot more than I did. I've not had that experience.
No, I don't do that anymore. And now I abhor traveling for business. We talked a bit about the investment, and I'm sure an investment banker's pitch is because we're based on a percentage of the transfer price. We'll try harder to get you more money. But a third is a big drop from what they would charge.
Yeah, I think that's their pitch. They also pitch that they have these super sophisticated structures that nobody else knows about. Well, I got news. The ESOP world is a very small community, and there are no secrets, and there's no secret sauce, and we all know what everybody else knows. And so that is a pitch only when they tell you they know things that nobody else knows.
Yeah.
Your lawyer and your CPA don't make that pitch to you. And it's not appropriate for professional advisors to work like that. And in terms of maximizing price, our approach is to make sure, and after 41 years, I can honestly say, we've never had one single situation where we didn't deliver a higher sales price to the owner than what we had estimated in the feasibility analysis. So if an owner does a feasibility analysis with us, they know they're going to get at least that amount. So we're really good at maximizing value.
Great. We said this just before I mentioned it just before the break. When you go to talk to employees, there have been bad ESOPs. And it's like having a customer that's unhappy tells, 4 times as many people as a customer that was happy. It's the same thing with bad ESOPs. I mean, you always have a couple of employees that say, oh, I was in an ESOP, or I knew a guy that was in an ESOP, and the thing went belly up and I lost my retirement and everything was gone. How do you I'm bringing this up because you mentioned taking it through the employee education process and starting that as part of your consulting work. How do you address that when somebody in the room first time goes, oh God, no, not an ESOP?
Well, honestly, we don't get that very often, but we have gotten it occasionally over the years. And what I tell people is, and I write about this in my book, is that there is a class of ESOPs that's referred to as rescue ESOPs. And those have gotten a lot of publicity. So the Chicago Tribune transaction would be a classic example of a rescue ESOP. The paper was failing financially. And so they went to their employees and to the union, and they said, if you will agree to wage concessions, then we'll make you owners of this business through an ESOP. And so they go along, they accept that compromise, they go along, and then the company fails. That company didn't fail because it had an ESOP.
Right.
That company was going to fail regardless. The ESOP probably postponed the failure for a period of time.
Well, actually, probably the wage concessions postponed the failure, not the
Well,
ESOP,
that's exactly right.
say.
But those wage concessions would never have been accepted had it not been for the trade-off of them having the ESOP benefit. But you're right. And so it wasn't the ESOP that caused the failure of the company. The ESOP was just there when the failure happened. And so, on those rare occasions when we do run into that issue, we can usually explain the situation because it was probably this type of ESOP referred to as a rescue ESOP, which typically don't work. And so we don't do those kind of ESOPs. We only do ESOPs for companies that have a strong financial history and a rosy future.
As long as we're talking about that, it brings to mind something else that I know you and I have talked about, and it's another kind of ESOP you don't do, but we run into plenty of ESOPs where, not plenty, but we do run into ESOPs where the owner says, oh, it was a piece of cake. I didn't have to negotiate very hard at all. I made an employee the trustee, and he accepted everything I told him to do.
Yeah.
How do you feel about employee trustees?
Well, back in the day, that was pretty common. So if you went back to the 80s and maybe part of the early 90s, that was not uncommon. But the ESOP practice has really evolved over a period of time. And now it is a true arm's length transaction. Well, you can't have an arm's length transaction with a person who's dependent upon you for his paycheck.
Right.
That person is not objective. And ESOPs are now being scrutinized by the Department of Labor much more than they were back in the 80s and 90s. And so it's important that it be a true arm's length transaction. And we would not do an ESOP for a business owner who would not agree to us engaging an independent trustee to be the purchaser. If they insisted on one of the employees being the trustee, then we would walk away because that's not a fair transaction to the employees, and it is highly subject to challenge by the Department of Labor. And so it's important to have a professional, independent ESOP trustee, somebody who has years of experience, and this is their exclusive business focus.
Okay. There's another thing I thought of in the beginning when we were talking about this, S corps. I know there's been a lot of talk in Congress about making S corps eligible to do ESOPs. Have they done that yet?
Yeah, they did that a long time ago. The most recent discussion about ESOPs has been to make the selling shareholders of S corps eligible for this 1042 reinvestment.
Oh, was that it? That they couldn't do that before?
And
Okay.
so last year, they started saying that they were going to phase that in. So now if you sell S Corp stock, or I think next year, if you sell S Corp stock, you can elect to reinvest 10% of that under Section 1042. So that's a small move in the right direction, but as a practical matter, nobody's doing that.
Yeah. Is it a scale, or is just 10% now and that's it?
10% now, with the hope that it will scale up in the future.
Okay. Okay. I know you are a walking compendium of ESOP stories. What are some of the most memorable transactions you've done?
Well, I'll tell you the most recent, most memorable. We have a client in Alabama that we did an ESOP for about 12 years ago. It was a very successful company. They had 1,200 employees. 200 of those employees had a PhD in engineering or in physics.
Huntsville.
Yes, exactly. you know,
Yeah.
These guys were rocket scientists.
Yes, not very different from South Alabama. I've been.
Yes, very different. Very different. And so that company did very well after the ESOP. And in February of 2020, right before COVID hit, their timing couldn't have been better. They sold to a huge European company for $1.6 billion.
Mm.
And so at that time, they had 2,200 employees. And so all that money, well, not all of it, because there were expenses and debt and other things, but the majority of that money was divided up among the company's employees. So a year or so after that transaction occurred, I was in Huntsville and had dinner with the person who had been the CEO at the time of the sale. And I said, Dave, what was the most memorable thing about the process? And he said that there had been an employee who had been at the lowest end of the wage scale of the company the entire time he had worked there, but he had been incredibly loyal, a great employee, and had been with them for 40 years. Mm. And so they had an announcement, a big meeting to explain the transaction and what it would mean to people. And so this gentleman walked into the CEO's office and said, boss, I still, just don't know what to tell my wife about what this means for us. And so the CEO got on his computer and said to this gentleman, you're going to receive $4.2 million in a few months. And the gentleman was just blown away. He couldn't believe it. And he said, that's going to allow me to set up a fund so that everyone in my family for generations will have college tuition paid for them out of this fund.
Wow.
And so to have an employee who had never gone to college, never had the opportunity to send his children to college, but now will be able to send his grandchildren and their grandchildren to college was just, I thought, a fantastic story.
No, that's wonderful.
ESOP success. That's what ESOPs are all about.
Mm-hmm.
Taking care of the selling shareholders and allowing those selling shareholders through this transaction to take care of their employees and their families. That's what it's all about.
Well, I'm a big fan. I currently coach 3 ESOPs, or 3 CEOs of ESOPs. One is the one we worked on, which is about 6 years old now, I believe. Yeah. Another one was a year or 2 after that. And as you said, it was an engineering company. The third one's a very large construction company who actually did theirs, I think, almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to watch that maturity. And they said the COO is the one I work with and coach in that company. And the COO told me that the biggest selling point they have for the ESOP, whenever anybody is, an employee is skeptical or why are we doing this, they have an annual gathering of all the retirees who cashed out of the ESOP. And he said that turns everybody around in 2 seconds.
That's a great strategy. That's really smart.
Yeah.
Because it's real to those people.
Sure.
And they can communicate employee to employee about what it's meant to them.
Yeah. Kelly, it has been a true pleasure. I always enjoy your company and your wisdom, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to come on, and hope our listeners do as well. I learned new things today, and I thought I knew about ESOP. So,
Well, John, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's always great to be with you.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure. Thanks again, Kelly.
Thank you.
Have a great day.